Now, first of all, thank you for those of you attending. I know these are stressful times, and I don't guarantee this will make you less stressful. But what I do want to address is the broad topic of leading in uncertain times. Think somewhat about the macro implications of the current situation, but specifically in the context of you and what they mean to you and what you might be able to do about them, whether you're confined to wherever the heck you are or not, right? Because all these events are happening, but finally, you want to know what, okay, yeah, and so what does that mean to you? So I'll do my best to give you a way of thinking about those things. Now, if any of you are my previous students, you will recognize some of this material. That shouldn't surprise you, but I promise you, it won't all be the same because the world has changed, and I've improved some of the frameworks and brought them up to date. So sorry if it's a little bit repetitive for previous students, but you will recognize some of it, but you'll learn new stuff too. In addition, I think this is being recorded. In fact, I know it is, but you can also get the slides from me. So listen and take notes if you want, but rest assured you will get the slides. I would ask that if you don't understand what I say, specifically the concept right there on that slide, ask me. But if you have a big conceptual question, we're going to do those at the end, okay? Because I want to get through the material, and if I keep stopping, I'm not sure I'll get through, and so on. So that's the way it's going to go. What is the agenda exactly? Well, first of all, I want to go into, I think we all know why we're here today, but I'll just make sure everyone is sure about the context. Then I specifically want to go into some potential second order effects. The description of this class was about there are at least 2 black swans in the world, and they appear to be mating. And I would suggest that they're going to have some cute little baby black swans out there. Now, you guys remember what black swans are, but I'll remind you nevertheless next time. So we're going to talk about, hey, gosh, as long as we're talking about cute little baby black swans, what might they be? So I'm going to give you just almost a random selection to show you how the world is changing so quickly right now, which I think you already know. And then I'm going to give you just a tiny bit of theory, because nothing will be more practical in helping you make sense of the new world that's coming. And then finally, I'm going to give you some specific frameworks and tools for thinking about this new world that is arriving, and then we will finish with your questions. That is where we're headed today. The numbers continue to climb. That's good. For those of you who just joined us, you will get the slides, and there will be a recording. All right. So in case you haven't noticed, there have been some events that have sort of come out of the blue and surprised most people. Now, after every major event that surprised people, you will find people say, well, I wasn't surprised. I knew it was coming. I mean, go to Washington, D.C. now, and every hot dog seller will tell you how they actually knew on September 10th, 2001, that there was going to be an attack at the Pentagon, okay? But I don't believe that. A black swan is usually conceived of as an unanticipated, very important, surprising event. And in case you haven't noticed, there are at least 2 in the world right now. One of them is obviously COVID-19, and the other is the oil price war, which has massive economic effects for the world economy. But there are others. There is, for example, the refugee crisis on the border between Greece and Turkey, and so on. I'll get into those. Before I get into those, though, I first of all want to go into where does the term black swan come from? You should know. Black swans, the term was coined by Nassim Taleb to refer to events that people just didn't conceive of as possible. They were outside the normal definition of possibility, because before the discovery of Australia, the definition of a swan was a white bird that lives on water. And then Europeans get to Australia and they're like, oh my gosh, look, there are swans here, but they're black. Who knew that was possible? That's where we are now. I am not going to try to foretell the future, okay? I do not have a crystal ball. Anyone who claims they have a crystal ball is full of it, all right? No predictions here, necessarily. Questions, though. And in general, if you encounter people who claim they know exactly what's going on and how it's going to play out, by definition, or that they can solve everything, by definition, please be skeptical, okay? Be skeptical of fortune tellers, faith healers, etc. Anyone who says they know what's going to happen is either deceiving you or delusional. Stay away from such people. I won't go there today. But in case you haven't noticed, there's this thing called COVID-19. It is definitely a public health emergency, and it is definitely a human tragedy. And it will get bigger as a human tragedy, okay? We are not even in Europe and the United States and Latin America, we are not even halfway through, okay? It's just starting. Sorry. Man, obviously, that is going to create massive demand shocks for some goods and less demand for others, and massive supply shocks, okay? Ramsey, I'll take that question towards the end. So we have COVID-19, we have the surprise oil price war. We have the renewed migrant crisis on the Greek border. Plus, you name it, there are lots of things going on right now that normally would get noticed that aren't being noticed. And just to give you a selection, I'll give you a selection in a minute, but just be sure of it. The world is not going to calm down anytime soon. We will be living through a period of head-spinning change in the months ahead. And a lot of stuff that seem impossible today will seem like common sense in a few weeks in many countries. That's going to reverse some trends. Some trends are going to get bent. Some trends are going to get accelerated. And they're going to be new ones. I think you all knew that. But as you know, which is why you're attending something like this, stop the world I want to get off is not going to be an option for anybody. Let's just think through some of the possible little baby black swans that are out there. You've got a million second order effects from just COVID-19 and the oil price drop. You've got to think about all the medium and long-term effects of the monetary and fiscal bazookas that governments around the world are promising to use. You've got to think about, gosh, there was previously this tension between China and the United States. What does this crisis do to it? Arguably, it accelerates and sharpens techno-nationalism and protectionism and the trade war. And the EU gets thrown in there somewhere too. We used to be hearing 6 weeks ago about Brexit and how the UK and the EU were going to work out a deal. Now that Britain's out, what will the shape of the trade negotiation be? This is obviously going to affect it, and no one can say how. Iran has been a hot spot. It's also a hot spot of the virus. What are the effects of COVID-19 on the Iranian regime's stability? And what about the same effects on Saudi stability? And how might each society in the Middle East as a whole react to this level of stress? We have to think that through. We have at least one precedent. Back in 1996, there was a famine in North Korea when there was a mutiny and an attempted coup by North Korean Army Corps. We know that the coronavirus is in North Korea. We don't know how widespread it is, and we don't know how North Korea will react to any pressures that regime feels. So that's out there. Before the crisis, African swine flu was a big news story. African swine flu is not a people disease, it's a pig disease. But it's a serious pig disease that had killed something between a third to a half of all the pigs in China, which is a measurable proportion of the world's meat supply. And one thing we can be pretty sure of, all measures to control COVID-19 have not been great for Chinese supply chains, food supply chains, so we might see more Chinese food price inflation, and probably they've gotten in the way of efforts to control African swine flu. So food price inflation going forward might be an issue there. This is, again, remember, I'm just trying to give you a feeling for some of the knock-on effects we should be thinking about. Before the crisis, Italian banks had a non-performing loan rate of about 8%. That's before the crisis. Now that is down from where they were, but it's still pretty high. And obviously, Italy is the center of the storm right now. And goodness knows, it's one thing for the Italian government to say, oh gosh, yes, don't worry, we'll forgive the mortgages or something, or we'll forgive rents. But that doesn't strengthen Italian banks. And we don't know how the ECB and the rest of the Eurozone would react to that. We also don't know what other firepower will be needed in other European countries. On the political front, there's at least a measurable possibility that this tips the presidential race towards President Biden, and that would have fiscal and regulatory and other consequences. Meanwhile, back in Europe, you've got at least one European leader, Viktor Orban, already actively equating migrants with COVID-19. And I suspect this will be part of a larger trend spurring populism and anti-foreigner sentiment in many European countries. And so far, we have not seen enormous evidence of EU solidarity. People are pulling their horns in, and that's important. We really need to consider the possibility that this will accelerate the trend of America's retreat from certain parts of the world. And some of you may think that's a good thing. But if Afghanistan, for example, now falls into the too hard category, America's spent, the last 18 years now trying to turn Afghanistan into Wisconsin. It's not working out. We might say, you know what? I think we'll leave. That would thrill the Taliban. It might be less thrilling than they'll admit to the Russians and the Chinese and Central Asia and Pakistan, because that means Afghanistan is 100% their problem now. And they're a lot closer to it than North America. Then we should think through, what are the impacts on Venezuela, Libya, Iraq, Lebanon, Argentina, all the places that were in the news 6 weeks ago. These things are still going on. Then there are the longer term scary possibilities. This is a proof of concept of future biothreats. We also know behind this lie new technologies. My students have heard all about that. I spend a lot of time on the new technologies that are out there making future bioweapons possible. I, for the record, do not think this was a bioweapon accident or intentional thing. But this will sure inspire people, and the technologies to do similar things are certainly out of the laboratory and into many, many hands. On the other side, there will be societies that have looked at this and say, maybe we need more in such an era. We need more facial recognition. We need more biometrics. Is this a boost towards big brother surveillance states, either out of genuine concern or pretended concern, and so on? So millions of second order effects to consider. And now, I don't want to talk about those. I want you to stop and breathe and think and consider. We could spend the whole hour just going through scary scenarios about the future. No one will be well served by that. Here's where the theory comes in. Panic will serve you and everyone you love poorly. Don't give in. Okay? You do not control what will happen, but you have 100% control over your response to events, over your attitude. You need to adopt that stoic spirit. Okay? You can't control most stuff, but you have 100% control over to how you interpret events, your attitude. And I would suggest that the quality of your responses will ultimately rest largely on the quality of the questions that you're able to generate about the present and the future, right? The quality of your questions will determine the quality of your life, not just your business strategy. Why is that? Because the questions you ask shape the information that you look for, the information that you find, and therefore the decisions you make and the actions you choose to take. So what we want to do, what I want to do for you tonight, or today, depending on where you are, is give you frameworks for improving the quality of your questions. All right? Not questions like this, which I actually thought was moderately amusing today, but some of you may think it's just in bad taste. I personally am not going to dress like that in any case, no matter what comes to pass. We are not there yet. Another way of saying this is, it's very easy for you guys to sit at home, whether you're in quarantine or not, and pretty much be a directionless news consumer. I got a question here from Sylvia, so I'll take it. Yes, Sylvia. Or no? I guess, well, I'll wait. Right now, you're probably in the mode of being a news consumer, or you're thinking, oh, I need to gather information. The crisis is so big. The crisis is so important. I need to gather information. I don't want you to be an information gatherer looking for the bears as you see those people are. Don't do that. I want you to be an information hunter and an active decision maker. It's a very different mindset. We live in the information age, but that doesn't mean you should just sit there and let it flow. It means you need to think through what information is really diagnostic. Where do I find it? Which do I trust, etc. Those are all big questions, but they're a lot better than just letting the news wash over you. How do we do that? Well, we do that. We ask better questions. We become an information hunter through what I call the surprise reaction framework. And why does this work? Well, or what is it? You probably learned to do, the first time you ever learned analysis, you probably did it with math problems on paper. And the great thing about math problems on paper is when you do them, you're externalizing the problem. You write it down, and then you decomposed it, which means you solved it in steps. And you probably thought, therefore, that to analyze something, you need numbers. You don't. You can apply those same procedures to problems either without numbers or before you start assigning numbers. Okay? You can do this. I'm going to give you some frameworks to analyze and break up and externalize non-quantifiable issues. The Greek root of the word in English analyze is just to break up, and that's what you want to be able to do. By externalizing the problem and then breaking it into solvable steps, you overcome many barriers to careful thinking. So how do we do that? How do we ask better questions and break up non-quantifiable problems? We do it with a surprise reaction framework that has three basic interlocking parts. That's what those arrows in the middle mean. We make some judgments about reality. What is going on? What do we actually know? What can we know? And then we have some value judgments. And that means like, well, okay, if that's what's going on, what difference does it make? And then we have some action judgments like, gosh, okay, what can we do? And those three questions are the right questions to begin to frame your analysis, to begin to break up your questions. But that said, let's drill down a little more into them. And in fact, let me simplify things. I sometimes do consulting for Walmart. They like things very simple. So for them, instead of this world, reality judgments, value judgments, action judgments, they like it, hey, what is going on? So what? What difference does it make? And now what? What can we do? And that's the way we're going to come at the world. So let's go to reality judgments and say, well, how do we know what's going on? Well, you start with the news, and you start with what I would call, therefore, an outside view of what you can actually know. You read something like the Financial Times and the different The different newspapers you trust is another question that I don't have time for. I cover it in my classes, but I can't cover it here. So you're starting with the outside view of what can we actually know? And you start putting in facts like, oh, the US and the EU are planning a stimulus. All right, that's good. Another tool for reminding yourself of what's going on outside in the world is not the news. It's actually to get out some maps. Remember, I teach geopolitics. I like maps. Maps are a great reminder of what you actually know. Not what you know from what's written in the newspaper, but from just what you actually know, which often gets forgotten in the heat of the moment. In the immediate news flow, you end up with what I would call the BSP there, stands for Black Swan porn, right? You're just watching, oh my gosh, look at what those black swans are. Stop, take a breath, look at a map. You'll see more than other people, and you know more than you think you know, okay? So get out a map and start filling in stuff that you know. Iran and Saudi, you're kind of reminded, oh yeah, there were Iran and Saudi tensions. They continue. And in fact, Iran was a virus hotspot, and that wasn't in the news I just read, but we know it. And I've recorded it on a whiteboard behind me, for example, so you can remind yourself of that. So the next part of what's known is to take an inside view. Because remember, I said this presentation is about macro events and you. So you know some stuff about the world and yourself that might be relevant. By you here, that might be you as an individual, but it also might be you as a company, all right? So who are your people and where are they? And your assets and your processes, and what is it possible to say about them that everybody in a group can actually agree on? Because by the way, this framework works well in groups, and it is designed specifically to bring the collective knowledge out of a group, to unfreeze it, because it can get frozen under the pressure of events. So maybe you're a company that says, you know, we got to make sense of these black swans, and we have 7 people in Dubai, and we, you know, that's an important fact that we should record that we know. Or maybe we own $35 million in Greek debt, and therefore the Greek crisis caused a problem. We bought Greek debt. Now there's another crisis on the Greek border. What do we think? So you start to use that known column to write down what you know about the outside world and the inside world. Then you start another column. You say, all right, if we've got that stuff on the whiteboard, what can we presume? Now, presume is another word for recording your assumptions. And so maybe your company is deciding, yeah, we really think the ECB will loosen the money supply more. Or maybe internally we think, you know what, our people in Dubai are probably okay for at least a week. We're just going to work with that assumption. You write it down. Now, what's going to happen? People are going to disagree. That's what you want. Some people will say, you can't assume that, or you can't assume that. And other people will say, oh my gosh, we know that. I can already tell you that, etc. The point of this exercise, this framework, is to open up that debate and create a map of what you know and what you don't know. So let's go to the next column, which is, of course, unknown. There are countless unknown things. For example, maybe internally you don't know the total amount of backup inventory in the company. Now, these exercises are very hard to do because you guys are from all different companies and all over the world and stuff. So I've had to create a generic company that has some backup inventory, but it doesn't know the total amount. All right, so that's an unknown. Or you might not know the number of migrants in the Greek refugee camps, and maybe that's relevant to your business, or maybe it's not. Who knows? But for purposes of this exercise, I've decided it's an unknown. But it is in some sense knowable. These are what the intelligence community calls puzzles. All right? Now, puzzles are questions that can be actually solved in principle. All right? Maybe they're technical, maybe they're factual, but the point is, if you have access to the right information, you can answer the question. Now, sometimes the information's secret, but maybe it's just unknown or it can be quickly looked up, but you're using this framework to record that it's important and you don't know it right now. Okay? Now, I don't want to give you the impression that puzzles are easy just because they can be solved in principle. Back in 2003, it was in some sense knowable whether Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, okay? But because there were denial and deception operations and there were hidden stuff and so on, it was very hard to solve that puzzle. But it was in some sense knowable. And I'm bringing all this up because there's another category on your chart, and that's unknowable stuff. Unknowable stuff is different from just unknown. It's literally, there's no one on earth who knows this stuff. What is Kim Jong-un's, what is his perception of the stability of North Korea? We don't know. Maybe he doesn't know. Nobody knows. There's no fact there's no secret to steal. There's no fact you can gather. They're experts with opinions, but that's different. Obviously, nobody knows the impact of UK tax breaks on UK business confidence in Q3 of this year. It's just unknowable. Why is it useful to write down stuff that's unknowable? Well, in part because you don't want to waste too much time on it. You write it down and you say, well, wow, that would be really important and nice to know, but nobody knows it. So let's not spend too much time looking that up. Let's focus on the stuff that is unknown, but in some sense knowable. So in the intelligence community, you usually distinguish between puzzles and mysteries. And mysteries, let me give you a little more detail on mysteries. Mysteries are simply inherently uncertain things. They're contingent choices and actions. And even those people might not know what they are. And no matter how much intelligence you collect, even if it's secret, mysteries can't be solved because definitive answers simply don't exist. And the actual logic train that you use to think about mysteries versus puzzles is different because no one can solve them definitely, and you need to spend a lot of time thinking about argument and analysis. Now, Aditya is asking, how much of this gets priced into risk models today? And the answer is almost none of it, right? Because this is what is known in the oil business as non-spreadsheet risk. If I can't quantify it, it doesn't go in my numerical model. And I'm suggesting to you that if you want a broad picture view of dealing with black swans, you've got to get your head out of the spreadsheet and start thinking about non-spreadsheet risk and accept there are a lot of important things you can't quantify and that are mysterious. Focus instead, where do you focus? Well, there's a continuum between secrets and mystery. The distinction is useful. The distinction is quite useful. And just for some shorthand, if you want to know, well, hold on, what did he say? What did Milo say is the distinction between a secret and a mystery? A secret, usually you say, the secret is who's the president's mistress. Presumably, at least the president and the president's mistress know the answer to that. They may try to keep it secret, but it's a secret. And that's a very different type of question from what the heck is a $30 oil price going to do to Venezuela combined with COVID-19. Just don't confuse the two types of problems when you're thinking about the future and your part in it. Okay. Obviously, as a general rule, you're trying to drive data to the left. And when people, in the environment we're in, you're going to end up with a lot in the unknown and a lot in the unknowable column. Do not get depressed. The fact is, it's more useful than you can imagine to create a shared explicit map of you and your colleagues' ignorance about the present. And then you can debate it, but at least it's better than just arguing. You have a shared framework. Here's what we know. Here's what we think. Here's what we'd like to know because it's knowable. I'll call an expert. And then here's stuff that nobody knows. Okay? That is the way I suggest coming at what is going on. Reality judgments. What about the next part? Value judgments. figuring out what difference this, if this is what we know, how do we figure out what difference it makes? Well, I've got some frameworks for you here to generate these better questions. Start with 3 basic questions, okay? How big is this event? Is it structural? By structural, I mean, does it really change the way things change? Does it just reinforce existing trends, changing trends? How quickly will it affect decay? By the way, I think COVID-19 is structural. It changes the way things change. And there's a debate to be had, always, but ask the question. And then you want to figure out, all right, what's driving the timing of this issue in stock markets, in financial markets, in political markets? What's driving the timing of this issue? Is it a 24-hour news cycle thing? Is it a political cycle thing? So you're asking, is in what aspects? BC is asking, in what aspects might this be structural? Well, maybe it's politically structurally important. Maybe it's economically structurally important. Maybe it's technologically structurally important. You don't know. Maybe it's got its own cycle. Maybe it's the natural cycle. I mean, at least in the case of COVID-19, it's virus. In the case of oil price, there's a political element. There's an economic element. We don't know. In the case of the Greek border problem, it is in one sense political, and in another sense economic, and in another, deep and on and on and on. So you want to be thinking about that and debating that. And then finally, you do want to ask yourself for a minute, hold on. If the surprises continue, are they likely, is this going to be worse? Probably. Try to get a consensus among your peers whether the worst is over yet. Is this going to surprise, as they say in financial markets, on the upside or the downside? Who knows? I would suggest to you that what we are living through now is a time of enormous structural change. And there'll be different cycles to it playing out, different timing cycles to this playing out. And it is, frankly, in my opinion, far more likely to surprise initially on the downside than the upside, but there still could be upside, particularly for individuals. How else do people make sense of what does this mean? Well, one way is historical precedents or analogies. They say, oh my gosh, when I'm trying to figure out so what, I say, gosh, this reminds me of the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. Or this is like World War II. When it comes to tourism, coronavirus is as bad as World War II. Or, gosh, you know what? The oil crash price, it last crashed in 91. And maybe we can learn some lessons from 91. Trying to learn lessons from the past like that is a good idea. But there are dangers. So how can we prevent the dangers? Well, to avoid the key dangers, first of all, is you don't want the analogy to kind of get too discussed without explicitly acknowledging it. Saying, okay, hold on, you're citing an historical example. Let's write that down. Why would you bother to write it down? You write it down because of the next step, which is to simply say, what made me think about this analogy is some similarities. But similarities are very seductive. Don't get drawn in. There are often differences. So you simply come up with a framework of you note the analogy, you put down the similarities, and then you start recording them, and then you record the differences. So, obviously what made you think of Spanish flu is that it's caused by a virus and it spread worldwide and it was very dangerous. But when you're trying to figure out what this means for you and your company, you want to note the differences. We have much better medical knowledge today than 1919, so maybe we'll create a vaccine. The 1919 flu, if you look into it, actually had very different effects. It killed more young people than old people. So most of you should be thrilled by that. I'm a little disquieted because I'm older, but still, there you go. Very different age dynamics. Or the fact is, in 1919, a lot of Europe was badly malnourished. A lot of the world was badly malnourished by the First World War. And that led maybe to a different outcome. The point is, you want to record that you're using an historical precedent, and then note the differences as well as the similarities. That will prevent sloppy thinking as you're thinking about what something means. The final way I want to talk about the way people figure out what things mean is what I call event cascades. And event cascades are just a fancy way of saying, well, if this happens, then that will happen. Is that wrong? Is that looking too much into the future? No, I think it's inevitable. I think it's a very human response, and it's a very sensible response. But you can get better than most of your peers, if you treat event cascades a certain way. You want to take a 360-degree view of the event cascades. And what that means is, basically, you probably, maybe, if you went to business school, unfortunately, you heard way too much about Porter's 5 forces, which they call the strategic framework. It's a good framework, but it's not strategic, it's tactical, but that's a different class. The point is, use Porter's 5 forces to think through cause and effect in the round. What that means is, you're saying, what is the impact of $30 Brent crude on, obviously on your own company or sector? Great, but that's where people stop. Maybe it's the target sector, but they stop there. Don't stop there. Keep going. Say, all right, yeah, that's the effect on us, but what about on our competitors? What about on our distribution channel? What about on our supply chains? And what about on our customers? If you're going to play the if this, then that game, try to make it more complete than just, oh my gosh, here's what it means to us. Don't let your egoism or your narrow focus undo the good thinking that can come from if this, then that. All right, finally, at some point you're going to be asking, hold on, I think I have some hold on reality, what's going on. I think we've got some good discussion about maybe what difference it makes. Maybe we can do something. And I want to stress something. I've noted very carefully, I used to phrase this question as what should we do? And I've changed it. As I say, we're living in a time when black swans are mating, and they are going to bring pain and change and opportunity. And therefore, the right question is, what can we do? Not a panic version of, oh my gosh, black swan, what do we do? Not a conventional, well, okay, yep, something happened, what should we do? No, I want you to ask creatively, the world is changing, what is in my toolbox to survive and prosper? What can we do? It's a subtle change, but it's an important one. So, we're starting, most business schools teach you to come at the world top down. Oh, here are the macroeconomic statistics. Let's go down to the city level, and then let's go down to this sector and work out a beautiful top-down spreadsheet of how the world is going to work or how your business is going to work. Don't do that. The easiest part of that first framework I gave you, KPUU, it's the inside view. It's what you know about yourself or your own company. Okay? So you should start with that inside view and say, okay, let's be contrarians. What is it that because of who we are and what we have and what we do gives us a different view, either better or worse, of this event from the rest of the world? Okay? So what's the event? What is the consensus view? What's our view? And what are the implications of the different? So maybe you're an e-payment provider. Yesterday, I got notified by the Illinois Tollway that congratulations, our customers, we're no longer accepting cash at toll booths. You must use e-payment. So if you're an e-payment provider in the environment we're in now, you're thinking, okay, the event is cash payment of road tolls is now forbidden. The consensus view is, frankly, that is really inconvenient for some people, and it's bad for employment, and it's kind of a pain, or it's a non-event. But from your point of view, uniquely because you're an e-payment provider, you're saying, hey, that trains new consumers to trust e-payments more, and it begins to drive more towards a cashless economy. So the implications are we need to start mapping new e-payment needs and markets. This is a good thing. you need to say what's good for you others that may be bad for you, and what's bad for others that may be good for you. And those sound like very cold-hearted questions, but frankly, we need to be realistic. And that's the way the world works, and you'll have assets and so on. And it leads to the next point. You should adopt a set of questions around what's called effectual reasoning. Some of you might have taken classes in effectual entrepreneurship. Effectual reasoning is the type of reasoning where you say, okay, I'm not going to treat the future as fundamentally predictable. In fact, the future is probably fundamentally unpredictable. But in some sense, if maybe I can't predict it, but I can control it in part, at least through my own actions, and that maybe aspects of this environment are constructible through my choices and my company's choices. That's the way a lot of entrepreneurs think. You start bottom up. You start with the inside view again, and you ask yourself, whether as an individual or as a company, who are we? What do we have? What do we know? Whom do we know? And therefore, what possibilities do we have? Don't get trapped in the, oh my gosh, the world is changing fast. I must do this. I must do that. There will be necessities, but there will also be possibilities. And I invite you, as you're thinking about how to cope with these baby black swans and big black swans everywhere, think through possibilities. Learn to profit from disorder, like Nassim Taleb says in Anti-Fragile, right? There will be entrepreneurial possibilities. A new world is coming. It's going to be partly up to you to figure out how you make the best of it. Once you start doing that, probably you'll be considering actions, and people will say, hey, if we do that, here are the pros and here are the cons. That's okay. That's a good thing. I encourage you, however, you can make those conversations slightly more productive as a leader by talking about pros and cons and fixes. Fixes are things that mitigate the cons. So just to give you a very simplistic example, you come up with a course of action and it's easy to do. That's the pro. Hey, this is easy. Well, the con is it's going to hurt like hell. Okay, so that's bad. But the fix is we have painkiller. Okay, a trivial example. But when you're getting into the pros and cons of actions, don't stop there. Don't make it binary. Think shades of gray. Pros, cons, and fixes. That's how you'll get to effectual leadership. And then finally, before you take action, there's one other question you should ask yourself, and that's, before I take that action, is there anything I could learn? What could I learn that might make us change our mind? Why is that a useful question? Because it pushes you back to known, presumed, unknown, and unknowable. And you say, oh, okay, hold on. Is that thing that would make me change my mind if it's true, is it even on that chart? Have we looked for an answer? The reason you want to do that is it's very easy, once you have a hypothesis, a view of the world, to seek information that confirms that view. And what that question demands of you is that you look for information that disconfirms your point of view. It's otherwise known as somewhat akin to the scientific method. Okay? In fact, there's an entire method developed by the CIA for penetrating deception originally that I teach called analysis of competing hypotheses, which gives you a framework for doing this even better. But I don't have time to teach it today. I'm happy to do another session on analysis of competing hypotheses or take my class. But it's boring, it's hard, but it's important. So I related to you that I think we are going through an enormous change, and I don't underestimate the emotional demands that places on you. But one of the best ways to lift your head up, take a deep breath, and get through this for yourself and your loved one's sake is to ask the right questions. And you can do that with these frameworks. For reality judgment, you've got known, presumed, unknown, and unknowable. What's going on? Here's a place to start. For value judgments, you've got, is this structural? Does it change the way things change? What's the timing of this issue? What Is it likely to be surprised on the upside or downside? You've also got historical analogies and precedents. Remember similarities and differences. You've got event cascades that you'll do in a 360-degree manner. For action judgments, you're not thinking about what should I do or what do I do. You're saying what can I do? Who am I? And what toolbox does that open? You've got a contrarian framework to differentiate your inside view from everybody else's. You've got those effectual questions. Who am I? What can I do? What do I know? Whom do I know? Then you've got pros, cons, and fixes, and what would change your mind to debate the course of action you've decided on. This, to me, is leadership in a time of great macro uncertainty. I urge you to think through not just how do you survive, but how do you profit from disorder? Because I genuinely believe that is not a selfish impulse. That is an impulse that is likely to help you and millions of people if enough people think that way. There will be pain, there will be tragedy, there will be change. But it is in the hands of people who do classes like this online to decide whether that's largely for the good or largely for the bad. Now, I am happy to take some questions for those of you who have questions, and I'm happy to do it by microphone or chat. I won't answer by chat, but I'll speak if you want to type your question. Erica already asked, should they follow step by step? I think you should definitely start with the known, and then that will quickly lead to debates about what it means and what you should do. But I usually do start with the known. But the point is definitely to do it collectively. The ideal, I know you all can't be in the same room often, but somehow come up with a virtual whiteboard to get a shared map of your knowledge and ignorance, and then begin to debate what it means and what you should do, and what's inside you that can, what you can do rather. I lived in Brussels, Joachim, on Place Sablon, long ago and far away. Any other questions? I hope it has been helpful. I want it to be helpful. How do you get teams and collectives together to debate and decide? Well, normally, in the old world, I would do it with whiteboards. I love whiteboards in the same room. Otherwise, you've just got to use the electronic tools available. I'll tell you what, if I were you, I don't mean to be self-serving, but point your team towards the recorded version of this seminar, then distribute the slides I give, and then get to it and create online a shared known, presumed unknown, unknowable framework. How do I think Putin's cabinet is looking at these two black swan events? Is it an internal threat? I think Putin's cabinet, Putin is chairman of a board. He's not as individually powerful, in my opinion, as many people think. He represents a set of vested interests, and his job is to keep the dogs fighting under the carpet and pretend to be in charge. Honestly, I suspect most autocracies are more worried than they pretend. You do not get to control 11 time zones by being bad at strategy, but Russia is a fundamentally weak power, and my greater worry is not Russian strength, but Russian weakness and the consequences of Russian weakness. To get geopolitical about it, but fortunately we don't have time. Everyone on the team should know the structure. Yeah, definitely, someone asked, should everybody on the team know the structure? And yeah, it is. It's designed to be a shared knowledge exposing set of frameworks. So there's no need to, you can reveal it step by step, but ideally, yeah. I'll tell you what, guys, because it's particularly guys who do this, guys tend to talk over women in the room in many cultures. And I find these frameworks are particularly helpful for unlocking the knowledge of either the female members of your team or those who might not be working in their native language or those who are otherwise just shy. But there was an expression at Siemens, if Siemens only knew what Siemens knows. Because these big organizations, people will say, I've seen it at Walmart. Someone will say, oh, it's completely unknowable, blah, 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 blah. And someone will say, are you kidding? Just talk to logistics. They know that. Or no. The guys in marketing have data that could answer that question. So that's one of the benefits of these frameworks. Let's see, anything else? Scenarios. Yeah, this is somewhat akin to scenario planning, but I find the storytelling element of scenarios, or I think it's far more productive to actually pay attention to what we actually know about the present than it is to try to look too far into the future. And part of the reason for that is the future's already arrived somewhere. It's just unevenly distributed. The future had arrived. The future for Europe and the United States had arrived in China 6 weeks ago, at least. It was just unevenly distributed. That's not unusual. So spend less time on prediction and more time asking good questions about the present. And I personally prefer that to scenario planning alone. Do I agree this epidemic crisis is more like to be 11S than the 2000? I think this crisis is akin to, well, there are several crises. Everybody focuses on COVID, but the oil price war is no small thing. Certainly for financial markets. And financial markets, of course, have cascade effects into the real economy that are important to consider. I would characterize COVID-19 like a slow-moving 9/11 with deep structural impacts. The world is not going back to the way it was. The oil price war I'm less decided about, although that may have knock-on implications for climate change and other things, which, by the way, is an issue no one's talking about anymore, along with Brexit and other things. So one of the benefits of these frameworks is they keep you engaged. They remind you that, oh, wait, there is a world apart from my screen that I know stuff about, and where the turning of the world and the passing of time actually will continue to matter to those other issues that no one is throwing at me on my phone right now. Get your nose out of your phone. Your phone will not bring you the future. You will create the future with the right questions. Any other questions, points? I'll scroll down. It looks, oh gosh, there are a bunch. Okay, evaluating the reliability of the information you know in the present is really tough. And there's a whole session, well, there are several sessions that touch on that. I teach a class called Intelligence Tools for the Business Professional, where we spend some time thinking about that. My suggestion would be that if someone tells you that your mother loves you, you want at least 2 independent sources to verify that information, okay? And they shouldn't be talking to each other or drawing on each other's information, okay? I would also be deeply skeptical of finding obscure sources that are going to unlock the magic key to your understanding of the future. Rigorous thinking that you do yourself and you control, carefully weighing the reliability of sources is important. And ideally, you want to know who is the source, what is their past reliability. A great book for this, by the way, if you want to get better at forecasting and evaluating information, do read Super Forecasting by Philip Tetlock. It's not a perfect book because I think he's a psychologist and he misses, in my opinion, some of the problems unique to the intelligence community that are not psychological, that interfere with predictions, but that's a totally separate issue. Super Forecasting is a good book. There's a book by Graham Allison called Essence of Decision that if you're trying to learn about foreign policy, that's really Foreign Policy 101 or Intelligence Analysis 101. It's called Essence of Decision by Graham Allison. That's a very good book. Most of all, be skeptical, always, of everyone. Low oil prices also in the medium term affect oil. So yeah, I don't think prices, it depends on, of course, how you're defining your terms. Medium term price rebound, I think the demand shock is too big. Ultimately, the Saudis were happy to have oil prices relatively low but bearable. and they didn't mind keeping American shale producers pumping. The Russians didn't like that, so they decided to pick a fight. We'll see who wins. I have my bets, but I dare not say them. I hope this has been useful. Another session's coming up. I have 3 minutes. I really am grateful, and I do want you guys to know, if you're the type of person who sat through this and paid attention, you do not have anything to fear in the world to come. You'll be fine. You'll ask good questions, you'll take action, you'll survive, and you'll thrive, okay? Just keep learning and keep asking good questions, and connect on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever if you want. Thank you so much for tonight. Yep, the slides will be shared. Take care.